Imagine a young, still unknown writer waiting 9 full years to see his book published, and somewhere in the middle of that ordeal, a printer burning the set type of the book to ashes. The writer managed to rescue only a single copy from that destroyed edition, and even that took a bit of a ruse. It sounds like the plot of a disaster film, but it actually happened. And the book that finally emerged from 9 years of stubborn persistence is now considered one of the turning points of 20th century literature. The writer was James Joyce, and the book was Dubliners. So why would a handful of short stories be worth defending with that much stubbornness? Here is the story. James Joyce was born in Dublin, Ireland in 1882. He grew up in a Catholic family, was educated at schools run by Jesuits, and later studied languages and philosophy at university in Dublin. Even as a young man, he began pulling away from both the church and the small, closed social world of Ireland. In 1904, he left Ireland together with Nora Barnacle, the woman who would stay at his side for the rest of his life, and he never returned to live there permanently again. He lived in cities like Trieste, Zurich, and Paris, earning his living for a time as a language teacher, and rebuilt Ireland from memory, from a distance, every time he wrote about it. In his early 20s, before he had written any of the sprawling novels that would later make him famous, he set out to write short stories about the ordinary people of Dublin. He wrote them between 1904 and 1907. His purpose was plain. He wanted to hold up Dublin to its own readers as what he called a nicely polished looking glass. But that mirror reflected something many people did not want to see. Joyce had used real street names, real shops, real businesses in these stories, almost without disguise, and that made finding a publisher far harder than anyone expected. A publisher named Grant Richards agreed to take the book in 1905, but backed out after his own printer refused to typeset parts of one story and objected to passages in others. A Dublin publishing house, Monsell and Roberts, agreed to take the manuscript years later, but they too pulled back, threatening legal action of their own. And here is the most dramatic part of the whole saga. When the dispute escalated, the printer destroyed the set sheets of the book by fire. Joyce only managed to rescue one copy from that print run through what can only be called a ruse. Finally, in 1914, Grant Richards published the book using proofs that had been salvaged from the Dublin printing. The time that had passed since he first began writing these stories was, in every sense, a stretch of pure persistence. Part of the reason for the rejections was that certain scenes in the stories worried publishers, who feared libel suits. Joyce refused to change a single line because to him, the entire power of the book rested on showing the truth exactly as it was. So what is actually in Dubliners? The book consists of 15 short stories, and it follows no single plot. Instead, it offers cross-sections of ordinary Dubliners' lives. Joyce arranged the stories in a deliberate order, not a random one. The first 3 are narrated through the eyes of a child, and the stories that follow move in turn through adolescence, adulthood, and public life, as if the book wanted to trace, step by step, a single city's entire lifespan from childhood to maturity. There's a story about a boy who idealizes a Dublin bazaar and is met instead with disappointment. There's a story about a young woman frozen at the docks, unable to decide whether to leave her home behind. There are stories about men defeated by drink, about anger exploding inside houses, about empty words spoken at political meetings. Some of the titles themselves tell you this. Araby, Eveline, Two Gallants, Clay, A Painful Case, Ivy Day in the Committee Room. Each one is a small window opening onto a different corner, a different age of the same city. Joyce followed what he himself called a principle of scrupulous meanness in these stories. He does not comment, he does not judge, he simply shows. That is partly why critics have never fully agreed on how to classify the book, some calling it realist, others naturalist, others symbolist. The book's final and longest story, The Dead, opens with a party held just after Christmas. A man named Gabriel gives a speech, dances, and walks home afterward with his wife. What looks like an entirely ordinary evening slowly moves toward a moment in which its hero confronts an unexpected truth about his own marriage and his own life. There is almost no rising music in this book, no scene that explodes. Everything proceeds in a quiet register. But the closing pages of this particular story are among the most discussed in all of Irish literature. Let us pause here, because whatever awakens in Gabriel on those final pages is a feeling difficult to summarize in words, and it is waiting for you in the full audiobook. What keeps Dubliners alive today is a concept Joyce built directly into these stories. He called it paralysis. In his view, Irish society, caught between religion, politics, and tradition, had been condemned to a kind of stillness, a sort of living death. Nearly every character in the book arrives at the edge of a moment that could change their life, and most of them, more often than not, cannot cross that threshold. Someone holds a train ticket and gives up on it at the last moment. Someone writes a letter and never sends it. Someone stays silent exactly when a word needed to be spoken. Joyce tells these small failures of nerve not as grand drama, but as the most ordinary thing in the world, and that is precisely why they cut so deep. Joyce gave this same phenomenon another name too, epiphany, a small but jolting illumination that arrives suddenly in an otherwise unremarkable moment. This technique left a deep mark on short story writers throughout the century that followed. The idea that a story does not need a great event to end on, that a small flash of awareness is enough, owes a great deal to the seeds Joyce planted with this book. The book also marks a threshold in Joyce's own literary journey. Critics see Dubliners as the first solid step on the road toward the large, experimental works he would write later, above all, Ulysses. The Joyce who would go on to bend the limits of language is not fully present yet here, but all the patience, all the powers of observation that would come later are already unmistakably visible in this first book. There are some striking facts surrounding the book as well. Joyce wanted dialogue set off with dashes rather than quotation marks, a method favored by certain writers on the European continent, and he defended this choice throughout his career. But publishers would not agree to it, and Dubliners remained the only one of Joyce's published works to appear with quotation marks in its original edition, though later critical editions restored the dashes he had wanted. The book went on to influence other artists across the decades. The Dead was adapted for film by director John Huston in 1987, which turned out to be Huston's final film. In the early 2000s, the same story was staged as a musical on Broadway and won a Tony Award. Some of the stories were also given new readings on radio and in audio form around the 100th anniversary of the book's 1914 publication. When it first appeared, the book did not sell well commercially and sat quietly on shelves, but critics never stopped writing about it, and today it stands as one of the most interpreted, most argued over works in modern literature. We have covered Dubliners, but these 15 stories were written to be read slowly, one at a time, absorbed rather than rushed through. You can also find Ulysses, this same author's far longer and more ambitious book, elsewhere in this series on the channel. If you would like to listen to the complete book as an audiobook, you will find the link in the description. Subscribe for more books in this series. Until the next one, remember Joyce's polished looking glass. Sometimes the way to describe a city best is to look at it as closely as you possibly can.